In this question, we need to find the distance from A to C, which is AC down here with the question mark on. Now we've got a right-angled triangle, and where we've got two sides and a right-angled triangle, we can use what's called Pythagoras' theorem to work out the final side. So Pythagoras' theorem is that a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So let's get that written down. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. Now, c squared is always the longest side. So here, this is the longest side of the triangle. If you're not sure which one the longest side is, it's always opposite the right angle. So c squared is going to be my longest side. Now, a and b can be either of these two. It doesn't matter either way. So I'm going to stick those numbers in to a and b. So I've got 8 squared plus 15 squared equals c squared. Now, I'm going to use my calculator for this, even though I could work it out in my head. But 8 squared plus 15 squared, well, 8 squared is 64, and 15 squared is 225, and that gives me c squared. I'm going to add those together, 16 plus 225, which is 289, and that equals c squared. So if c squared is 289, then the opposite of squaring something is to square root it. So I'm now going to do the square root of 289, which is going to give me my answer. Square root of 289 will be c, and the square root of 289 is 17. So c is 17. Now I need to just check to make sure that that's longer than the other two sides, because I've already said it's going to be the longest side, and it is longer than 8 and 15, so 17 looks like a sensible answer for the distance from A to C. Now, with this next side, I've got something a little bit different. The distance x to z is along here from x to z, but here we've not got the angle opposite the right angle. We've not got the longest side. So where before I had a squared plus b squared equals c squared, and I was working out the longest side, this time, because I'm finding a shorter side, it's going to be b squared equals c squared minus a squared, or a squared equals c squared minus b squared. Okay, so this question is slightly different because here we've got to find the distance xz, which is along this side from x to z. But here, that's not the longest side of the triangle. It's not opposite the right angle. So we need to do something a bit different. Whereas before we squared and added the sides to get the longest side, this time, if we want to find one of the shorter sides, we're going to have to square the longest side and subtract one of the shorter sides from it. So let's try that with the numbers. I'm going to find a shorter side, and to do that I'm going to square the longest side and take away the other short side from it. So 45 squared, punch into the calculator, is 2025. And take away 36 squared from that, which is 1296. Now you'll know if you've done C and B the wrong way round, because you'll end up with a negative number, which isn't going to work for you. So now 2025, take away 1296, gives us 729. So A squared is 729. Now, if you start thinking that a squared being 729 is a sensible answer for this distance here, then you should look at the others and think that can't be right. That can't be 36 and that's 45, because 45 has got to be the longest side. Can't be 729. And if you're thinking that, you've probably forgotten to square root it. So a is going to be the square root of 729, and the square root of 729 is, what's the square root of 729? Calculator, 27. Should have known that really. Square root of 729 is 27. Finished. And of course that is shorter than 45, so I can check that looks sensible, which it does. This one's a bit weirder because I've put it on its side. Now, first thing to note is that obviously we've got a right angle, and I've got this side here, which is opposite the right angle, and it's the longest side. So I know I'm going to be squaring and adding these two sides that I've got to find this distance RT here. So it's going to be a squared plus b squared equals c squared, where c squared is my longest side, so I'm going to put in the others. I've got 14.4 squared plus 1.7 squared, and that equals my c squared. So 14.4 squared plus 1.7 squared, and that gives me 210.25. I'll just put that all in one line there on the calculator. And that's c squared. So what I need to do now is I need to square root this, because obviously that's a way too big answer, 210.25. So c will be the square root of 210.25. So let's take that into your calculator. Square root of 210.25, and that is 14.5. And that looks roughly sensible because it's just ever so slightly bigger than this side, which makes sense if this one here is only 1.7. Notice that this picture obviously isn't to scale because this is 14.4 and that's 1.7. But don't worry about that because you've done the calculation correctly. It would normally have the words not to scale somewhere on the page, but I forgot to put it on. Find the distance from E to F. So again, we're after this distance here. Now that's not the longest side because 19.4 is opposite the right angle and must be the longest. So what we need to do is square the longest side and take away from it the other short side. So we're going to find that our a squared is going to equal c squared minus b squared here. So we're going to have a squared equals the longest side squared, which is 19.4, minus the b squared, which is 14.4. So 19.4 squared minus 14.4 squared, and you can just do that in one line of working out, is 169. So if a squared is 169, then obviously 169 is a way too big answer for that. I need to square root both sides to get down to a sensible figure. So a is going to be the square root of 169. The square root of 169 is 13.